And now I will try to explain away some of the discrepancies and contradictions between the various Terminator movies. And let me start with the original timeline again, in which the nuclear war started in 97, the future war ended in 29, John Connor was born in 84 or 85 and was 10 years old during Terminator 2, which was taking place in 95. We know this because the Terminator said that the war will be in 97, 3 years from now, and so that's why we know the movie is set in 95. It was also shown on a police computer that John's age was 10 years old in 95. His date of birth was in 85, and so that's why we know the first movie was in 84. And also Dr. Silverman said that Sarah was 29 years old during Terminator 2, which means she was around 19 years old in 84. So Terminator 3 kind of retconned that by saying that John was 13 years old during Terminator 2. I guess they got confused with 97. They thought the movie was taking place in 97 and that they stopped Judgment Day in the last moment. And they missed the scene in which the Terminator says that's 3 years from now. Also, they showed Sarah's headstone in Terminator 3, which said she was born in 1959, which makes her 25 in the first movie, which is yet another contradiction. So maybe we can explain away some of these mistakes by saying those were mistakes by the characters and not really facts. So for example, Dr. Silverman might have confused her age with some other patient, and she was not really 29 during Terminator 2. Maybe that headstone was not accurate. Maybe her friends in Mexico made up that date, maybe to confuse the authorities. Maybe she wanted not to be recognized. Maybe the first movie was not taking place in 84, the date was never mentioned in the movie itself. Maybe it took place earlier, and that explains why John was 13 in 95. Maybe the events of the movie were actually in 97 and the Terminator was confused. Maybe he didn't have accurate records of history when he said it will take 3 years. This is the least likely scenario that the Terminator will get confused because, you know, he's a machine, he's a computer, so that is very unlikely. The Terminator TV show also kind of retconned some of these details, also moved some of the dates around. They turned 97 to 99 and stuff like that. I won't get into it in this video. I'll deal with that separately, but let's assume just for fun that all of those dates, all of those ages were accurate just as shown on screen. So how can we explain that? Well, the only way would be to say it's a result of a new timeline being created by the time travel. So let's draw all this time travel. So we know that Kyle Reese and the first Terminator were sent to 84. Then later another Terminator was sent to 95 and another good Terminator also sent to 95. One of them wanted to kill John, the other to save John. And as a result of all of this, they rescued Sarah Connor from the mental hospital, and because she was free from the mental hospital, she decided to change the timeline. So without this second time travel, in the second movie, she would still be in that hospital and would not be able to change the timeline in time before 97, and the timeline would go just like in the original timeline. Only thanks to the Terminator coming back in the second movie, she was able to be free from the mental hospital and caused a new timeline to be created by cancelling the war in 97. So let's draw it as a new timeline in which the war never happens in 97. And let's go with the director's cut ending, in which we actually see in the future that Sarah Connor is a grandmother and we see John is a senator in Washington, and the whole future war never happened because they blew up Cyberdyne and killed the Dyson. So they did manage to prevent it. So let's go with that. Let's say that timeline did indeed happen as we saw in the alternate ending or the director's cut ending. We can say that's the ending of the whole story. But what if later on in the future advanced AI still gets developed anyway, despite all the changes they did, and starts the cycle all over again? So we know that in the first movie, thanks to the Terminator parts from the future, that's what allowed Cyberdyne to develop Skynet. But we can say even before this time loop, Skynet had to come from somewhere for the future war to exist, and so Skynet probably was able to be developed even without this whole time traveling. And so even if they destroyed all those pieces from the future that Cyberdyne used, Skynet would still get developed at some later point. Now, because John became a senator somehow, I guess he was able to hide his criminal past and probably took a new identity, he was probably acting in the Senate to try to prevent the creation of any kind of advanced AI, but still in the future it somehow got created anyway. And was probably defeated yet again, possibly by the same John Connor or maybe by his daughter, the one we saw in that alternate ending, the granddaughter of Sarah Connor. So because the Connor family defeated this future AI, it decided to once again try to eliminate the Connor family from history, and so maybe once again it sent a new Terminator even further back in time to kill Sarah Connor even earlier. And I'm not talking about the Genesis timeline, I'll get to that later, but I'm talking about something we haven't seen in the movies, some kind of time travel event in which a Terminator was sent to before 1984, let's say to 1981, which would fix John Connor's age in Terminator 3, as I will show you. So let's say this is 1981. John Connor or someone from the future, maybe his daughter, sent another protector, maybe not Kyle Reese, but some other protector to save the younger Sarah Connor. And this created yet another timeline in which she was much younger when the first Terminator attacked her. If her protector was once again Kyle Reese and he once again made love to her, that would make him kind of a pedo because she was underage. But at least it would explain why John Connor was now 13 years old in the time of the second movie, which we can say maybe happened the same way as we saw it or similarly. And so from this new timeline, they sent those other Terminators to the year 95, in which John was now 13 years old instead of 10. And once again cancelling the 97 nuclear war by destroying Cyberdyne. And it's possible some of the events now happen differently to how we saw it in Terminator 2. And maybe the good Terminator was not melted down in that steel factory, but rather they somehow got separated from him and he was still alive, which would explain why John Connor in Terminator 3 thought the Terminator he met in 2003 might be the same one that he met previously. This is something that didn't make sense in the movie. When he met the Terminator, he started asking, do you remember me? Do you remember Hasta la Vista? All of that, which doesn't make sense if he saw the Terminator being melted down in the second movie. But if all of this is taking place in a new timeline in which he was now 13 years old in 95, then maybe those events happened differently and he simply got separated from that other Terminator, or he somehow died in a different way, which might be plausible for him to somehow repair himself, and that's why John later thought it might be the same one as the one he met previously. Maybe once again because things happened differently, maybe not all of Cyberdyne got blown up as it was in that original timeline in which they did manage to postpone Judgment Day by at least a few decades, but in this new timeline that is different because all the past events have been slightly changed, maybe it only got postponed a few years, unlike that director's cut ending. And also this all will explain why John looks different, because he will be a genetic sibling of himself. Because he was conceived a few years earlier, that means he had to come from a different egg. Even if the same sperm cell impregnated him, which is also unlikely, he must have come from a different egg of Sarah Connor, which means he has slightly different genes, and he is a genetic sibling of himself, even if his father was still Kyle Reese, which is also a question mark. It's possible someone else became his father. Either way, he is a genetic sibling of himself, which might explain his different personality. Why he's such a whining crybaby in Terminator 3, which doesn't seem to fit his character in Terminator 2. So we can say it's a totally different John Connor genetically. He's his half-brother or just a brother. Either way, it's not the exact same John Connor, which explains why he looks and behaves so differently. And in the future, he's not really as important as the original John Connor was, because now it's his wife, Kate Brewster, who seems to be more important in the future. And she's the one who sends the new Terminator back to 2003, while Skynet sent the TX to 2003, which kind of ended up bringing them together when they were supposed to be together in this new timeline from 95, from just before that Terminator showed up, Terminator 2. So they had that love story, and their children were said to be important in this new timeline in the war against the machines in the future. And so Kate Brewster sent that Terminator to just the right moment to ensure that her future comes true. But this whole future is very different to the one we saw in the first two movies. Another big difference is the fact that Sarah Connor died from cancer in this new timeline, which did not happen in the original one. We saw her as an old lady in the future, which means she never died from cancer. That only happened in these new timelines. Then later we have Terminator Salvation. We didn't see any time travel in this movie, but we did see John Connor get his famous scars, which we saw him in the future in all the versions. We can explain the other ones as kind of just cinematic way of showing him being scarred, so him having the exact same scars doesn't really fit with the idea that these are all different John Connors, genetic siblings. How come they all get the exact same scars in the future? That doesn't really make much sense. but we can say all those other times we saw that was not really a real flashback, but someone imagining the future because someone else told him the future, so he simply imagined that future that we saw in that scene. And maybe Kyle Reese told everyone that he had facial scars. He told it to Sarah Connor, she told it to John. We can say that those scars were just kind of cinematic expression of him being scarred, but it wasn't really the exact same scars. Those scenes were all flashbacks. One of them we saw in Terminator 2, it was Sarah Connor imagining the future based on the stories. In Terminator 3, it was John himself imagining the future. And all in Terminator 4, we saw the real events that gave him those scars. Now in Terminator 5, we also saw him with the exact same scars, so technically that has to mean that was in the same timeline as Terminator Salvation. And the problem with that is that we saw him meet Kyle under different circumstances than in Terminator 4. So we can say it wasn't the same Kyle Reese. Maybe the one we saw was simply summoned by that same name, someone that Skynet and John Connor thought that was his father, but it actually wasn't. Maybe later he did the genetic test and saw that it wasn't actually his father, and only later he met the real Kyle Reese, which actually was his father. Now after all of this, we also have the time traveling in Terminator 5, in which someone from the future, we don't know exactly who or when, sent another Terminator back to the 70s to kill Sarah when she was even younger, and someone else sent another Arnold to save her, and he did manage to save her and raised her, and that created a whole other timeline, which is the one we saw in Terminator 5, which basically erased all the other movies because it all started from even before all the other movies. And we can also talk about the Terminator TV show, in which we saw that there were Terminators which were sent even before all of that. We saw some Terminators were sent back to the 1920s, decades before any of this. So we can say those events of the TV show, which could have happened from even farther away in the future. After Terminator 5, maybe Skynet did survive in the future. We did actually see him survive in the future as that one who infected John Connor with the nanites and then sent John Connor back to try to ensure his own creation. But that future Skynet that we saw in that scene still exists in that future. So it's possible he might have been sending even more Terminators back in time, which erased all the events of Terminator 5 as well. And maybe that created the new timeline of the TV show, in which everybody were their own genetic siblings. So that explains why Sarah Connor looked different. Since we know that the Terminators change history from the 1920s, that means maybe her parents or even grandparents had sex at a slightly different time, which made her into her own genetic sibling. So the new Sarah Connor in the TV show could have been genetically different and the same as John Connor, and that creates a whole other timeline with different details as well. So we can say the TV show is the latest timeline that was created after all of these ones were erased. And it remains to be seen how the new movie Dark Fate will mess things up. And according to rumors, and this is spoilers by the way, according to rumors, it will be revealed that more Terminators were in the past who were sent to the same time of Terminator 2, meaning around the year 95. And so even though they did prevent that future, they did erase Skynet from existence, other Terminators were still alive in the past who did not get destroyed. And one of them did manage to kill John Connor after the events of the second movie, and then Sarah Connor became a Terminator hunter, trying to hunt down any other Terminators. One of them did manage to kill John Connor, which created a whole other timeline, which I guess we will see in Terminator Dark Fate, in which Sarah Connor lost John and became a Terminator hunter, and there was some other type of AI in the future, not Skynet. Skynet was indeed destroyed in 97, but a different AI existed in the future and still sending other Terminators to the past, which Sarah Connor is killing. So that's probably what will be in Terminator Dark Fate, according to rumors. So when it comes out, I will have to try to explain that one as well. So that's it for now. Let me know what you think about all of this, and we can discuss it in the comment section, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.